Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're dialing in from. Welcome to our webinar on Conscious Family Business, a blueprint for the preservation of your legacy. My name is Annabelle Dumlao. I am a partner at Excellent, and I am thrilled to have a nice conversation today about this very interesting topic with Alex Felman, founder of Exponential U and an expert in family business. Hi, Alex. I'll ask you to introduce yourself to our audience in a while. But first, let me welcome our other speaker today, Carlos Agustin, partner as well at Excellent, and also with a depth of experience in family-owned businesses. So without further ado, Alex, can you please briefly introduce yourself to our audience, and minding that we are being listened to live, and also probably the recording is being watched by families from all over the globe. So please go ahead.
Sure. Annabelle, thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to be doing this with both you and Carlos. I'll keep my introduction short because there's a lot of different pieces and it could go on for a while. But there's kind of two major sides to my background. On one side, I come from a family office. My family office was started by my father. I'm the second generation, and I've been actively involved for the last 10 years. So since 2014, my background is actually in biochemistry and the commercialization of science. And so within this capacity, when I initially got involved, it was essentially to become a biotech analyst and analyzing deep tech. Kind of as that has evolved over time, I really play kind of two major roles. One, I lead up the European branch of what we do. In 2015, I moved to Europe to get my master's and been here since. So I lead up the European branch from Riga. But in addition, as you could probably imagine, I lead up our tech and venture arm of what we do and kind of sourcing and diligence different deep tech related investments. On the second side, and kind of this will kind of pull together in the end, I've actually been an educator for, at this point, it's about 20 years, so since 2005. Initially, I was teaching science after school programs, but since then, I've been kind of involved in education in every way, shape, or form you can imagine. Was teaching for a number of governments, doing private corporate training, and since I joined the family office, I've been really actively involved in either entrepreneurial education or investment education in various capacities. And with that, it's kind of since the beginning of this year, I kind of essentially decided how to bring those two worlds together and it created something called Exponential U, which is essentially a financial education program for family offices, kind of taking my family office background and my educational background and merging them to try to help families and family businesses. I'll keep it there.
That's so exciting, Alex. And thank you for being here to share your experience, your background, right? And what you've learned along this wonderful journey. So Carlos Agustin, please, can you please introduce yourself as well, briefly, like Alex did?
Okay, sure. Hello, Annabelle. Hello, Alex. More than happy to be here having this conversation around a topic that I am passionate about. My background is very connected with the family-owned business space. I've been the CEO in a couple of family-owned business. My career started working in my own family business, where I had the privilege to lead the company. And for many years, I've been the CEO of my own family business. So fortunately or unfortunately, I had the chance to face firsthand all the challenges that usually family business have to address. So I am quite familiar with this kind of challenge. I have to say that I know that I made mistakes when I was leading the family business, but at the same time, I got massive learnings that help me right now to try to help other family-owned business to overcome more or less the same challenge that I addressed when I was leading the family-owned business. Apart from my own family-owned business, I've been the CEO of a family-owned business and the family office of at a Mexican conglomerate family-owned business. So it was an amazing time for me, learning or trying to help others on the ground to help them to address the most critical challenge, working from the, I would say, more from the human side and from the financial side. And this is part of the things that I would like to share with you all during this webinar. Some of the learnings that I got that I think will be relevant for others to know in order to thrive and to preserve the wealth of the families. So really looking forward to the conversation, and pass it over to you, Annabelle.
Thank you so much. So it's really exciting, and I'm sure our audience would love to ask you questions. There is a feature in your webinar chat that you can pop in a Q&A feature where you can ask your questions, and we will be very happy to allocate some time at the end of the webinar to answer those. So as I am here leading the conversation, I'm going to ask my own questions first. So I think the topic is really relevant, right? Especially for family-owned businesses. But my question to you, Alex, let's start there. What, in your experience, makes a family business last?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of two sides to this, and I was thinking about this a little before. One side is, let's say, the initial of while the business is running, kind of, let's say, in the lifetime of the founder. I think it really comes down to sort of the business needs some form of excellence and something that they do better than other people in the market. I think increasingly, essentially, a lot of markets are getting to kind of winner takes most or winner takes all dynamics, and so you really need to be kind of top 1%, 5% to really compete against other people trying to do the same thing. So I think the first part is sort of, having a business that is excellent in whatever industry you are, and I think that's one side of it. And I think, family offices wouldn't become successful unless they're excellent in something. So I think that's the first part. I think the second part becomes, how do you, let's say, pass this excellence between generations and from one generation to the next generation, and how do you kind of create, let's say, a bridge so that, let's say, the excellence doesn't die with the founder, the matriarch, the patriarch of the family business. And I think that's kind of a slightly different conversation, but I think ultimately both these things kind of come down to the values that the family has, and the values around some things like growth mindset of keeping a high standard of excellence. How do we kind of transmit some of those values? And I think we'll kind of unpack some of these topics, but I think it really comes down to these things of do you have an area of excellence that you, in your space, your industry, your field, and do you have a way for you to kind of continue and pass that excellence along between generations and family members who will take over?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very interesting. You talked about values. Carlos, what does it mean? It's in the title of the webinar. What does it mean to be a conscious family business?
I would say that a conscious family business means something deeper than the own meaning of their words. I would say that it's a way to look at the world in a different way. It's to becoming a conscious family business is to achieve, from my point of view, the right balance between three critical dimensions. On the one hand, the I dimension, all related with the business, the business outcome, the preservation of the wealth for the family, but not only to look at the it dimension, also look at the we dimension, the way that family members can have good family dynamics, can have good conversation, can have good relationship. And the third dimension is also relevant, that is the individual, the I dimension, because if family members don't find the right space for them to thrive, it's difficult to get this right balance between all dimensions. So either family members are working in the business or not, the business family should have the power, ability to really find the right place for each of the family members in order to help them to thrive, to promote their wealth, the self-esteem, and the individual well-being. I would say, as a summary, that is becoming a conscious family business is a way to respond family and business circumstances, and to decide how to respond in a way that business, the business needs, family values, and the goals for the business. I know that is I would say that it's easy to say, but it's very hard to deliver.
Well, for sure, that resonates with many clients, right, who have worked with us. Let's say non-family owned businesses are accustomed to our framework of the I, we, and the it, or the integral framework, right, of sustainable and extraordinary success. And I love how you bring that to the realm of family owned businesses. Alex?
Can I, before jumping in, can I add something to this that Carlos mentioned
yes.
as well? I think, at least for me, I think a big part of let's say, bringing in the word conscious within family business, I think you have to think of around intentionality. And I think really having kind of purpose and direction with the family business and where you're going. And I think one thing we were talking about before, which I think is a good point, is I need to bring it up, is I very much think across the board as someone who's very entrepreneurial myself, at the end of the day, a business is a tool. And it's something that you kind of, you use to achieve certain goals. And I think what can get away from a lot of families is that sometimes it kind of flips on its head where all of a sudden they find that they're working for their business and not the other way around. And the business is not achieving its goals that they set out. And I think kind of bringing it back around is with this idea of a conscious family business is bringing around this idea of intentionality of hey, we're using this business to achieve certain goals. And I would argue that within that, it's often goals beyond purely financial means. It's usually, let's say, the financial benefits tend to be the economic engine that keeps it working, but that's usually in support of a greater goal or purpose, because I don't know, usually, right, most entrepreneurs want to solve some problem. And maybe as you gain wealth, that the problems that you can solve become bigger and bigger. And I think that's one thing not to forget about this is the kind of intentionality. Maybe having some self-awareness and kind of being aware of like, hey, this is what we're trying to do, either as an individual founder, or as a family, and trying to, let's say, find causes or purposes that resonate across multiple generations, and that let's say you can get buy-in from multiple sides.
Right, and it goes beyond financial wealth ultimately, at least in your experience, right, Alex? Why is it so important for family-owned businesses to focus beyond financial wealth for the preservation of the legacy that they want to create?
So there's a couple sides to this. One of the things that I'll bring this up is I've kind of come up with this equation of legacy, which I called excellence times time. And I think the idea of where this really builds in of why is it kind of more important is ultimately, let's say, to fulfill the time component means you need to get buy-in across multiple different generations. And you need, let's say, something that is quite compelling, where you get, let's say, Gen 1, Gen 2, Gen 3, where they go, yeah, I want to do this, I want to achieve it. And I would say, ultimately, I think for a lot of people, let's say let's call it the wealth game for its own sake, gets very boring very quickly. And I think even people in Gen 1 will often, if they're quite successful, will get to kind of, I think that's one side of a midlife or slightly past midlife crisis, is they sort of win the wealth game and they go, okay, what now? And I think then, their children or their grandchildren will start to be like, wait, we have this game we've kind of succeeded at. What's next? And so I think you need this greater purpose to get buy-in across generations. Otherwise, if we kind of look back at this equation, the time component, if you really want to sort of maximize it, that means you have to do this beyond your own lifetime. Otherwise, it will be kind of limited by your lifetime. If you're the kind of patriarch, matriarch of the family business, then it will last as long as you do, and then kind of fade away as kind of, until the last person kind of forgets your memory. But if you can kind of get future generations to buy in on it, then it can kind of continue to be lasting across, multiple generations, centuries, etc. And so I think that's the real reason why this is important, because you can get people to rally around a specific cause.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like the risk that families would be taking, right, would be of irrelevance if they don't think beyond just financial wealth and just your lifespan, right? So it's about thinking bigger and talking about risks. Many of those risks are not necessarily just financial; they're also behavioral in a way. So, Carlos, what is your perspective on how behavioral risk issues, right, could be affecting the long-term success of family-owned businesses?
Unfortunately, I have my own experience on that, but for sharing that with you and with the team, I will say, and you know, statistics are plenty of statistics in the world that shows that more or less behavioral risks are behind more than 80% of reasons of failure in family wealth transition. Here at Excellent, we have a metaphor in order to explain what is the reason of that. And we use the metaphor of the iceberg. You know, in the iceberg, what you see above the surface is only the tip of the iceberg. Usually, what I experimenting working with family-owned businesses is that most of the family-owned business only focus on what you see, on the results that they would love to achieve, and they look and they focus on wealth preservation. They focus on achieving the business results, on all the stuff related with the it level. And usually, in order to do that, some family business try to define new rules of engagement, new processes, trying family members in order to help them to acquire new capabilities or skills. But sometimes this is not enough in order to get the desired results. And what happened is that a few family-owned business focus in what is deeper, the bottom of the iceberg, that is the mindset, the beliefs, the value for the family. And usually the conversation around the strategies around the way the family would like to preserve the wealth only focus on the tool in order to have certain results, and they hire a good lawyer or a good financial advisor in order to design in what way they can avoid or all this stuff, and they forgot that what really matters is for a family to have the right conversation, to get alignment on the vision for the future, the kind of business that they would love to be in the future, how they can find the right balance between the business and the family. And this is not a matter of technical stuff. This is a matter of having the right conversation among family members. And this is easy to say, but it's very hard to do, because when you are addressing difficult conversation, the conversation becomes so emotional. And if family members don't have the right skills in order to address this conversation, at the end of the day, all this lack of good conversation impact in their option, in their chances to preserve their wealth in the middle and in the long term.
I guess that a crucial part of those conversations is about maybe differences in perspective about the values that want to be carried on from one generation to the next. And that's a tricky conversation to have. Alex, what role, you mentioned it before, and I promised that we'd get back to that. What role the core family values, the purpose you mentioned before, what role does that play in preserving the legacy of a family-owned business?
Sure. I mean, I think it's ultimately crucial. I would kind of echoing a little bit of what Carlos said is, I think, let's say that the more technical side of managing this is actually probably more straightforward, right? And it's either you can learn the skills yourself or hire various professionals to help you do it, lawyers, accountants, etc., maybe CEOs. I think that's actually easier. I think it's the kind of the actual values or the meanings within the family that is much, much harder. There's sort of no one can solve that problem for you. In essence, it's sort of something that you as a family need to figure out between yourselves and other family members. I think there's also, let's say, one thing that Carlos didn't touch on that I think is important to consider, right, is I think one of the reasons that, let's say, these conversations end up being so difficult is within family businesses. Let's say that the line between, let's say, the family within the business and the family outside the business is extremely blurry. and hard to potentially separate those conversations. So very much, let's say, elements from one bleed into the other and vice versa, right? Elements of I don't know, let's call it family grievances. Well, like family grievances will bleed into the businesses, and the elements of, let's say, business debates or whatnot will bleed into the family life. And I think that is one of the challenges, right? Is when you have these family businesses, you almost can't avoid it. Your life and your business is so intermingled with each other, you can't kind of avoid it on either side. And so, let's say if things are not going well, it kind of affects all of your life compared to one element of your life, which can be quite difficult. On some more maybe like specific things, on one thing that I've seen is, from talking to a number of families, it seems like, values transfer is one of the biggest things that some of these families are worried about. Is
Mhm.
They ask, how do we make sure that we transfer these values from our older generation to the younger generation? There is a really interesting statistic out there that basically says about 85% of the next gen believe that they're ready to take over, while only 39% of the kind of current gen believe the next gen is ready to take over. So there is this kind of dichotomy between and beliefs on are they ready? Do they have the values or not? And you kind of see it from the different sides. A different thing as well that I just think that you tend to see play out in family businesses is often, let's say, the first generation often, this is a side statistic that we didn't talk about, but generally speaking, if you want to be worth more than $10 million, I think it's 80% of the people who are worth more than $10 million are through business ownership. Like, that's the primary way to kind of really excel your wealth. So most of the people have businesses. So if you are kind of first generation, to do this, you need to be a business owner. So you probably have entrepreneurial values, you have kind of an entrepreneurial mindset. And one of the things I think that you tend to see is that for a lot of these entrepreneurs, they don't necessarily want their children or grandchildren to have this kind of same entrepreneurial life that they had, because usually that tends to be a lot more working hours to kind of dedicate your life to your business to make it successful. They said, oh, I spent 80, 90, 100-hour weeks. I don't want my children to do that. However, you sort of also have this dynamic that overly simplifying, but realistically, if you produce more than you consume, your wealth will grow, and if you consume more than you produce, your wealth will shrink. Like, and in a very, very kind of basic level. And so, without instilling, entrepreneurial mindsets is very much the mindset of a producer, creating more value than you consume. Without instilling those values to the next generation, then they're going to consume more value than they produce, and that just means that over time, the family's wealth is going to shrink and disintegrate. And I think that's one thing that I think, it's kind of interesting, because it seems almost counterintuitive, but the family members want to kind of save the future generations from the lifestyle that they have, but they're almost setting themselves up for maybe not the immediate next generation, but kind of the family failure in the long run, or let's say the non-preservation of the wealth in the long run.
Right. It is counterintuitive. And yes, Carlos, you wanted to dive in.
Building on what Alex have just said, from my point of view, it's impossible to think that family members can avoid to have crucial or difficult conversation. It's not possible. They are going to have this kind of conversation, but what they can do is to equip family members with the right mindset and the right skills in order to have this difficult conversation. And when a family is able to do that, this kind of conversation not only are more productive and get better and deliver better results, but it's a way to put values in action. Because when you are having this kind of conversation, you are role modeling the values that have helped the family business thrive among the years. So it's more, you get more than good results if you are able to have this conversation with the right mindset and the right behaviors, because you are helping to build something stronger that is connected with the values of the family, and this is more powerful than even the results that you are going to have.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I can totally see that, right? How equipping beyond the technical skills to have these types of conversations that address the elephants in the rooms, right? And that statistic, Alex, like probably the younger generation is more than ready to take on leadership roles, while the previous generation is not so sure. Do they talk about that? That gap, is that addressed? And I would infer that it is an elephant in the room. But I'm just curious, Carlos, how do you think younger generations especially, how can they develop those leadership skills that would kind of make their predecessors a little more confident in their capability to lead the businesses?
Okay, good is very relevant. And at the same thing that before developing leadership skills, I think is relevant to help family members to know the business. And more important that knowing the business for family members is important to love the business, because you can love something if you don't know it. And if you are able to know the business and to love the business, to get ready to lead the business will be easier. And here there are two concepts that I think are very relevant, because you can try, or you can try to create a space in which you help family members to know the business, to try to make they love the business. But if you do that only from a theoretical standpoint, your chances for success will be very low. There is a technique or a way to do that from my experience is more powerful, is to create the storytelling, to create a family narrative for the family and for the business. It's a way to transmit or communicate the values and actions, values in which the patriarch or the matriarch can share with other family members of the business, when they started the business, all the difficult situation that they for sure address when they started the business. And these are powerful, very powerful stories that help family members to know the business deeper and to love the business. And when you are able to do that, or in parallel you are doing that, you can create a kind of school of successor, or whatever you want to call it, in order to help family members to get new skills and capabilities, develop new mindset that could help them to look at the business and the family from a different standpoint. I will say that what is relevant at this point, if you try to educate next gens in order to lead the business, is to focus on what I will say the human skills, not the technical skills. Nowadays, most of gens are going through good universities, MBAs. The technical skills is not a problem, for sure. That will make the difference is the skills that they can get from the human side, like to have a good conversation, to negotiate, to solve the conflict in a constructive way, provide feedback, all these kind of things that when you are having a difficult conversation, or you are going through a time in which difficult decisions have to be made, to embody those skills are very relevant in order to be successful.
Alex, you're an educator. How does this resonate with you? And what other ways to foster an open communication culture do you have in your back pocket to share with the audience?
No, I think this definitely resonates. I think one of the other things, and I think especially now, I think this is particularly important within the moment that we're living in. I think it's a bit of a reminder that I think, let's say, all the generations will bring something different to the table. And I think kind of as a reminder, and usually, let's say, whichever generations is in decision-making power, I think they have to come at it with the perspective of the other family members, even if they're, let's say, more junior, do have skills that are valuable and that can actually add to the conversation. And I think this is particularly, let's say, relevant in kind of the shift into a more digital age, and kind of the differences in between generations, between kind of pre-digital and post-digital world. I think there's actually, let's say, skills and transformations and knowledge both kind of technical, but also a little bit on how, you know, humans interact online and the like, that let's say the younger generations have a much are much stronger at than the older generation, just because let's say they were born with it. I'm maybe aging myself a little bit, but I'm in the transition generation, kind of the millennials, and kind of saw this rise. But anyone kind of younger than myself would have, you know, digitally native, grew up in this. And I think that's one of the things of just, if you approach this from, okay, you know, every family member has something to bring to the table and something that they can add and bring value to the family, and you know, new perspectives on, I'd say often it's, I think, where the world is moving. It's, I think, a great way to engage with kind of the younger generations is sort of, hey, they have their finger on the pulse of where society and the world is going. So maybe, you know, listen to them about trends and things of that nature to help kind of adapt, let's say, your family vision for the modern circumstances. I think that's kind of a great and obvious place to do these types of things. And also, I kind of agree. It's this, I do think having a more holistic form of education where it's a mix of the technical as well as the more human, non-technical side of it is important. And I honestly don't really think it's successful unless you do both. It's you sort of, you need both the human side and the technical side to work together.
Are there any specific strategies, Alex, that, you know, for that learning oriented mindset to get really, you know, like an example of how you've seen that work in practice, right? Not just talking about, oh, we have to be curious about each other across generations, but have you seen an example of it?
Well, I mean, I'll do kind of my own family story, which I think is quite interesting to see what happens. So, funny enough, I have a younger sister who's about 5 years younger, and my family tried to get her to join the family office before me. And I think one of the things that's quite interesting is pretty much she lasted 1 month. And I think part of the reason she lasted 1 month was because, let's say, there wasn't a clear pathway for her within the family office. They're sort of like, you'll come work with us and we'll kind of figure it out later. Was I think, or someone's gonna ask, but I think that was a bit of the approach. And so that wasn't successful. And then I want to say, trying to think of the timeline, but 1 or 2 years later is when I kind of got involved, and my story was much simpler, where there was sort of, our family had an obvious need, which my skills and background fit really nicely. So we kind of had a growing investments in the biotech space. So I kind of joined as a biotech analyst initially, and that kind of paved the pathway for my initial development. And then kind of a funny thing happened was, this is probably 5-6 years ago. My sister started to develop her own interest in real estate. She started doing her own investments on her own. And lo and behold, as she started to get her own interest, the family said, oh, well, you have an interest in real estate, you have skills in real estate, let's bring you back in. And now she's involved on the real estate side of what we do, right? And so I think maybe this is not necessarily an educational thing, but I think it's a mix of, I think this is where I think it's right interesting, right? On one side, you have sort of the technical skills. So she was technically into real estate, and I was kind of technically into kind of biochemistry. But then you have the soft side, where, let's say, I was coming from a place where I kind of knew what I wanted and I had my direction, so on and so forth. But my sister was coming from a place where she needed some time to figure out herself and what she wanted, and so on and so forth. And it didn't quite work until, let's say, not to say that got solved, but until those things were figured out. And then it became kind of a clear way to kind of integrate her and bring her into the fold and where the appropriate place was. And that is maybe a different thing of there is some amount of, let's say, self-discovery that might need to happen for younger family members that may or may not need to happen within the family office context, but probably allowing them and giving them a space to figure out who they are, what they want, what their goals are, and then figuring out a way that, okay, we can loop them in and kind of fill in the gaps. And yeah, I'm not sure I quite answered your question, but I hope that.
No, but it's a really interesting real life example of how families end up making those decisions, right? Do you allow the family members to make the decisions for themselves? Like, do you believe in that they have the answer within themselves, or do you impose a decision like, this is what's right for the business? So Carlos, I'm just curious, what are the barriers that you see from your experience that get in the way of effective decision making in family-owned businesses?
Well, I have several in mind. I am going to share some of them with you, and Alex, I would love to hear from you what is your experience. At my end, one of the main barriers are related with informal power, for example. You know, in family-owned business, usually there are people that they don't have the title, but they have the power to influence who have the title to make the decision. If this is not clear, this is a huge obstacle in order to have an effective decision-making process. The other obstacle will be the lack of clarity on roles and responsibilities. Sometimes, if you are a family member, it seems that you have you have the right in order to make decisions, but it's not because you are a family member. You must have the knowledge and the position in order to do that. Other obstacle is the family dynamics. If there are not a good family dynamics in place, they are not going to address the right conversation, and family or the leadership team with family members and non-family members have to make a decision about a certain topic. It's going to be difficult to have an effective decision-making process. And the last two obstacles, I will say that one of them is very, very, very relevant, and I think is becoming more relevant nowadays. That is the governance. If the family don't have the right, the clear structures in which decisions should be made, it's going to be complicated to have an effective decision-making process, because each issue is going to be analyzed from the family standpoint and the business standpoint, and the kind of decisions are quite often are complete different. So issues around the family should be evaluated to assess in I would say, a family council or a governance that take care of the family issues, and the business issues should be addressed in the board of directors or the structure fully focused on that. And if you don't have this structure, it's going to be difficult to have an effective decision-making process. And the last one that I would like to share with you, with the people who is joining us in this call, is the lack of alignment. The lack of alignment in only one thing will be very relevant from my point of view, and this is what is related with only one decision. Do we want to be a family first or a business first? Because if family members don't have clarity on that, all the conversation will be completely different, because the kind of decision that you are going to make, if family members decide that this is a business that is family first, fine. The compensation model will be will go in this way. The accountability will be probably not so hard to fulfill, but the kind of decision will be completely different. However, if we decide that this business is business, the conversation changed completely. So only only to have the family together in order to make a decision on that will change dramatically the kind of things that the family can do in the future.
Is there anything that resonates, Alex, with regards to that, or any strategies to help make wiser decisions within a family-owned business?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think one of the big things that I think is to your point, and I'll bring up the stat and whatnot that I think ties in. Coming back with what you mentioned before, 75% of family businesses don't have succession plans in place, and so again, they're not having these conversations at all. And so I think what you really need to do is almost intentionally set aside time to have these types of conversations. I've become, let's say, as I've gotten a bit older, a big proponent of, essentially, if it's not on my schedule, it's probably not going to happen. And I think running your family business or let's say running your family and your family business in this way of like, okay, let's intentionally set aside time to have these types of conversations, to have these alignment meetings, to do whatever, I think becomes really important. I think that's one of the things that a lot of families honestly are not doing, or are not really being like, hey, every, I don't know, quarter or month or whatever kind of cadence makes sense for you, your family, your business. But let's have it like in the calendar. We're having conversation. We're going to make sure that, you know, we're getting these issues discussed. Where I think alignment is a big thing, not just on family first, business first, but generational alignment, purpose alignment, directional. I think alignment in general across family members is quite important. Otherwise, pretty quickly, especially, let's say, not necessarily just from 1 to 2, but once you get to like Gen 3, 4, maybe even 5, families can start to explode really quickly, and you can start to have a lot of family members who, let's say, could stake a claim to being involved or ownership or the like. And I think just almost the management of that becomes almost a full-time job in and of itself. Talking to a number of families that, you know, get to like Gen 4, and I think it's 50 family members or something in that scale, right? And unless you're kind of very, let's say, again, coming back to why we talk about consciousness, unless you're very intentional of like, hey, we're going to set aside time, it's going to happen at this frequency, it's going to have these goals to make sure that like none of these issues kind of lay below the surface, because let's say if you don't, they can kind of linger behind the scenes for a very long time. And as I mentioned before, unlike, let's say, other businesses, for family business, it's one of those things that will affect both your life and your business, and because they're kind of intertwined, and so it will kind of affect everything. And I think that's one of the really big things is actually to do it, schedule it, put it in there, make sure that it's important, and prioritize it. I think that's kind of one of the biggest, let's say, hurdles, or let's say tactical ways to go about this is kind of make sure that it's there. Don't ignore it, basically.
Very, very tactical, very pragmatic, and very useful. Carlos, at Excellent, we're specialists in mindset shifts, right? What type of mindsets do we need to cultivate in a family-owned business now that we're talking about, you know, let's set a blueprint for preservation of legacy? What type of mindsets would stand out for you?
One of the most relevant, without doubt, will be to adopt a mindset of player instead of a mindset of victim. You know, to take self-responsibility is something that matters in any type of companies, but in the family-owned business settings is more relevant because most of the conversation in the family-owned business space becomes so emotional, and the family business space is more complex than other kind of business, because you are having a conversation in which, or you are making decision where you are blending the business dimension with the human dimension, and all this stuff brings a lot of complexity. And in this complexity, is easy to blame others when things go bad, or when you are not able to hit your goals. So what we say in Excellent, that instead to become a victim in which you blame others when things are going wrong, is better to adopt a mindset of self-responsibility, or a mindset in which you focus in what is under your control. Imagine a conversation between family members and the situation of the business is not well. If each of the family members start the conversation, blame you, Annabelle, because you blah, 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 or blame you, Alex, because you are not able or capable to blah, 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 the conversation, you can understand that is becoming very emotional, because it's not only if you are my teammate and only my teammate. Well, it's difficult to, if you hear that I am blaming you because you don't blah 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 blah, but if you are my teammate and my sister, the conversation changed dramatically. So what I experimenting in my life, working as a family member, working on the business as an executive, an external executive, trying to help family-owned business to thrive, is that the conversation changed dramatically. If instead to blame you, I assume I take my own responsibility and say what the things that I did. I did bad, and this is a way to start the conversation from a different standpoint. So this mindset shift from victim to player, from my point of view, is quite relevant for the family-owned business space.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for that. And we're nearing already the time that we might allocate to some questions from the audience. I'm reminding everyone that you can drop your questions in the Q&A section, and we will address them at the end. So, but before that, we've talked about barriers. We've talked about, things getting in the way, statistics that blow our minds about how counterintuitive sometimes things happen in family-owned businesses. Alex, is there something that we can offer family-owned businesses to actually, do this more skillfully, with greater chances of success, an awareness and development journey, right, that they can embark on to help them through these barriers, loopholes, etc.?
Sure. No, I think it's one of those things where I urge, and I think it's probably a good way to sort of lead towards the end of this. I urge the families to look at their businesses more holistically, understanding that there are kind of multiple sides to what they're doing, not just the financial side. There are kind of multiple sides of capital. I know one of the things that I've been developing with Exponential U is really centered on kind of 3 pillars, which is learn, leverage, legacy, which is essentially around personal development, investment education, and then kind of family office education dynamics. Sort of it's kind of an I, kind of how to make money, and then kind of an us as a group. I think bringing these together and having this kind of more holistic way of looking at your family business that's not just from a financial oriented point of view, and then having your education around that. I know we were talking about kind of the multiple forms of capital, and kind of assessing your family's multiple forms of capital is a different way to do it. I think it's one thing I do want to echo that I think is really nice from 2 things I actually want to echo from what Carlos was saying. One is I do think family businesses tend to, let's say, try to optimize a lot more emotional value than a lot of other types of businesses, or at least let's say the emotional value within the business is spread across a larger group of people, and a larger group of people have a stronger kind of emotional attachment, as well as kind of are kind of aiming for a larger growth of the emotional value, which is why I think some of these conversations can get very emotionally attached, as well as they bring in kind of, let's say, outside baggage of the family dynamics. But the other thing as well is sort of the idea of self-accountability, and also establishing of kind of an internal locus of control, right? To understand that kind of, I think that can become one of the things, especially as you go through generations, right? Is let's say the founding generation, obviously by creating these businesses, has a strong internal locus of control. That's why they're kind of enacting in the world. But let's say a lot of the future generations kind of just get thrown in to the mix, and it's sort of, this is how things have always been to a certain extent for them. They've kind of grown up in that environment. And I think from that, it can kind of seem like the locus of control is outside yourself. And I think, changing the mindset to re-internalize that and realize that, like, hey, I need to be self-accountable. I need to be the one who kind of acts and can kind of make a difference in the world, and bring that into the conversation, I think is important.
Fantastic. Before opening up the floor for questions, I have a final question to wrap it all up for both of you. So in turn, what would the practical steps, what practical steps would you recommend family-owned businesses to take today, right, in order to build that conscious family-owned business legacy, right, that would survive through generations, what would the first steps of that blueprint be? In just a very short, let's say, summary, Carlos and then Alex, and then we will open up for questions.
Good question. Something very easy to do, that is to put that as a top priority for the founder or the CEO of the company, because sometimes what is happening is that the leader of the family-owned business say to preserve our legacy is important, to preserve our values is important, but they don't do anything about that. So put that in the number one position of your priority and create the space in which you gather all the family or the key stakeholders of the family and start the right conversation in order to make it happen.
Okay, Alex?
So I think kind of a big way around this, first as a starting point, I think is honestly just to become aware of what the situation is, and to kind of take a look back and take a step back and look, where are we now? I'm a big, coming from the tech world, there's a big saying, you can't change what you don't measure, is kind of a philosophy in the tech space. So if you're not kind of measuring what is the current state of affairs within the family office, what are kind of our current values and current assets and all these, there's a lot of different things, both on the financial and non-financial side. There's a really, really great tool to help you do that called the Family Office Navigator that came out of IMD University. I'm personally doing some workshops around that. It's for people more on the tech entrepreneurship side. It's basically like a business model canvas for family offices. That's how I would explain it to others. And I think that's a really good starting point, because it can give you kind of a foundations of like, okay, what are all the different things that we have, for all the different types of capital? What are they? What's the status of that? Are family members in agreement that that's the case, right? I think that's sort of a thing as well, right? Is you as, let's say, the current decision maker, you might think things are one way, but maybe the other family members think things are different. And I think just getting everyone on the same page and having kind of a clear conversation to kind of go like, okay, here's where we are now. What do we want to do with that information? Where do we want to go, et cetera. So I always think things start with self-awareness. So kind of becoming self-aware as a family and kind of what the current status is, and then using that as a jumping off point is, I think, a great way to start.
Well, thank you very much for your recommendations. And as promised, let's take a look at some questions.
As a headline that we usually use at Excellent, what conversation at a time?
That's great. And get them on the calendar. Absolutely agree with Alex. If it's not on the calendar, it's not going to get done. All right. So I have a couple of questions over here. Whoever would want to take this one. How does having too much trust? I would assume that there's this, let's say, hypothesis that in a family, there can be much greater levels of trust between the members, right? How can having too much trust impact negatively or positively, I really don't know, in engaging in conflict within a family-owned business? So what role does trust play in conflict within a family-owned business?
From a point of view, is critical. With a platform of trust, or is without a platform of trust, it's going to be very difficult to address the difficult conversation, because some family members can feel that their voice is not taken into account, or they can get scary if they would like to share some ideas or point of view that are different from other team family members. So this is to have this conversation with a platform of trust and solidarity, I think is not way to go forward.
Alex, in your experience, can there be such a thing as too much trust and conflict getting out of hand?
So, okay, I don't necessarily think that, let's say, but I would almost say the opposite, is that I think a lack of trust tends to be the seeds of conflict. What I do think can become an issue, though, on what you're saying, which may or may not be let's say, a thing of conflict, but let's say, an over trust could lead certain family members to, let's say, take advantage of the circumstances. I think this is probably where, whether or not you want to necessarily call that conflict, but I think people can use the fact that, let's say, family members will usually strongly trust other family members to potentially take advantage of the situation. And if there's not really a strong accountability from that can cause all kinds of kind of downstream problems, as well as kind of accountability issues. And so I think if we're talking about too much trust being issued, I think it's there. I think people can kind of start to try to take advantage of the situation. Maybe, I don't know, use resources that they shouldn't be using, or too many, or the wrong circumstances. I think in a lot of ways, something that Carlos mentioned before, a lot of this can kind of, if you have a family business, kind of governanced out and sort of be like, hey, you know, these decisions or use of funds or whatever can only be used under these circumstances, which probably solve a lot of those problems. And you know, not necessarily so much the people who are trying to take advantage could do with that. But yeah, I think it's more the flip side is that once you start distrusting family members, it will just lead to conflicts. I know I was talking to a family in the Middle East where they're kind of having a succession thing, keeping this kind of very vague and kind of slightly high level for their protection. But essentially, some of the family members had the financial skills, so they kind of went ahead and set up some trusts and so on and so forth. But the other family members got very, very skeptical about, wait a second, why are you doing this? They didn't include them in the decision to set up these financial instruments. And then all that led to is when kind of in this case, it was a patriarch, when they died, it led to actually lawsuits to try to undo some of these things. It became kind of a whole internal family fight. And literally just sounds like if they kind of were more communicative with each other and had a stronger trust between them, this problem would have been solved pretty quickly. But because the people who, let's say, in their mind had the skills to execute on something, just went and did it without, because it kind of thought this was the best without consulting other family members, it led to a huge kind of mess within that family office. So yeah, that's giving sort of a kind of negative example of that.
Thank you. Well, we ran out of time. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Reminder to everyone, well, thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Alex, for joining us. I think it was a fantastic first step into the world of conscious family business. And hopefully people get a blueprint or an idea of how they can start their own blueprint for that. You will get, to the audience, you will get the highlights of this webinar, the full recording, since you have registered, and a survey to ask you what else would you like to hear from us with regards to this beautiful topic. So thank you very much. Have a good rest of your days, if you still have them, some time ahead of you, and the rest of your week. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.